another episode of the Better Habits podcast. And I'm super excited today because we have Brigitte, our, coach who's been on the platform so long. Oh my God, I'm forgetting my words. Certified habit coach. And, I'm going to just read your bio because I think it works best. Creator, writer, entrepreneur, mom of two, runner, former night owl, turn into morning person. We're definitely going to talk about that. PhD who branched out of academia. Well, we'll talk more about this. Brigitte, I'm so glad to have you. Welcome.
It's a great pleasure to be here. I was reflecting this morning about how long I've been kind of around Coachdotme. I've only been a coach since like late 2020, but I think, I mean, you could check my account, but I think I started using Coachdotme in 2013 or 2014,
There
something
you
like
go.
that. So it's been at least a decade.
That's what
It's
I'm
great to be
saying.
here.
That's what I'm saying, and we've been chatting back and forth various matters. So, I remember you forever. So, you know, um, we figured a lot of people who listen to us are coaches, but also people who want to learn good habits. So, it's going to be casual conversation that's going to benefit both, I guess. But mainly, we want with this podcast, I think eventually our vision evolved that we want to introduce our audience to great coaches. And, if you want to join us as another coach, welcome. Or if you want to hire our coaches, you're also welcome. So this is just to showcase our amazing coaches, and Bridget definitely one of them.
Thank you.
All right. Well, let's start. I mean, I just read your bio, and we'll get into some of the amazing points that are there. But let's start from the beginning. How did you get into coaching? You mentioned PhD, you mentioned academia, but now you're a coach, and I know you're not just a coach. And I'm gonna keep it as a bit of a suspense, as a cliffhanger, how they call it. You're also a vegan chef, and you have a YouTube channel about that. But let's keep it as a mystery, that if you want to listen to it, you have to hold on. So how did you get into coaching?
Well, for me, I'm not going to give spoilers, but coaching has definitely developed as something I do as a complement to the rest of my work. And that started probably before Coachdotme, when I was a PhD student, and maybe even before that, when I was working as a researcher. After being a grad student, I took a break a little bit from being a student, and I was employed as a researcher, and I was coordinating a team of research assistants. We were working on some grants. That was when I lived back in Montreal. And being a bit of a coach in terms of especially writing, supporting people with good writing habits, not just the content of the writing, that was a big part of my work, but also developing those writing habits, developing that daily, just chipping away at projects instead of constantly being in fire mode, trying to, at the last minute have a massive firework. So cultivating those slow burns, I guess, is something that I've been trying to share for others since probably maybe 2 decades or something like that, when I was a grad student, when I was a research facilitator, and then when I was a PhD student, also supporting just, peer kind of writing coaching was a little bit of a thing I did. And my personal interest in this is that I'm a terrible, terrible procrastinator. And I used to think that one day I would somehow cure this. But really, I've come to conclusion that I'm just a recovering procrastinator for the rest of my life. It's kind of the same thing as any sort of addiction, perhaps one that's less destructive in many ways. But it's throughout my life, it's been a habit that, you can do things at the last hour or maybe at the last minute, and it's still going to be okay. And when you do that, you get a bit of a jolt of satisfaction, oh, I only did this in the last 5
Dopamine,
minutes and it was
huh?
fine, right? But the reality is that that was never fully satisfying. It always feels like, I could have done better. This text, this article, this PhD dissertation, if I had worked on it more steadily, could have been better if I had simmered it over a longer period of time. And so as I learned those habits for myself to overcome that sense of dissatisfaction, I tried to bring in others along for the ride. And now I think I'm not healed fully, but I'm definitely recovered and sober for the most part, as far as procrastination goes. And I just love being able to support others who may be struggling with the same things as I still struggle with to some extent.
No, thank you for sharing that. I love that. Once a procrastinator, always a procrastinator is now gonna be is gonna be my mantra. And I think it's right because it's so easy. It's kind of same with any sort of addiction. Just like you mentioned, maybe it's not an addiction, but it's definitely a habit. And it's so easy
Absolutely.
to it's so easy to fall into your fall off the wagon, right? To fall into your previous pattern, the bad pattern. Interesting. And just on that, before we move on to next topic, like why do you think so many people struggle with procrastination? You probably had so many clients and you've seen it all. I do, again, I'm
Mhm.
Lydia and I'm a procrastinator
Yeah.
sometimes. And it does, has its benefits because, just like you said, you have just 1 hour and you're like, okay, now I'm in my best shape. I have the adrenaline rush. I have the dopamine rush. I have all this cocktail of hormones and I do it and I present it and I feel so good that next time I do exactly the same. I mean, I also tried to change it, but just why
It's
it is.
constant practice to
Mm,
overcome it, right? But I mean, if we look in the long range, like of hundreds and thousands of years, humans did not have the kind of work that we have today,
mm,
right? And it was all,
sure.
I mean, if you procrastinating on planting, seeding your
You're done.
fields, then
You're
that's it for
done.
you. But it was also very visible. A lot of the work we used to do, I think, was kind of obvious. Like if you don't do the work, the consequence comes kind of quickly. And the sort of modern contemporary work that a lot of knowledge workers or wisdom workers, whatever you call us, but those of us that are mostly playing with ideas and trying to create stuff and having that very different, more often like intellectual kind of work, it's often not clear what the work is. It could be anything, really. It's up to us to figure it out. And it's starting a company is also that. It's very um, fuzzy. What exactly is the next task I should be doing? There's so many of them, and at the same time, I don't know which one to start with. There's just too much, and it's also hard to tell when the work is done. And I teach cooking. We maybe go back to that at some point, but
Oh,
my
well.
favorite
Oh, we
thing in the
will.
kitchen, don't tell anybody because I don't want other people to know this, but one of my favorite things to do is wash the dishes. And why? Because doing the
Mm.
dishes is so soothing because here's the pile of dirty dishes, right? It's dirty. There's no doubt about that. And then I put them in hot water with soapy water and I wash the dishes and then I put there to dry. And when the pile is finished, it's over. The job is done. I could not have done it better than this. The dishes are clean. And there are so few tasks in the rest of my life that are anything like that. Now, having children, of course, the pile will grow sometimes while I'm doing the dishes, or as soon as you're done the dishes, it's kind of like inbox zero. You finish inbox zero and ping, here comes a new email. And it's the same thing with the dishes. You finish the dishes and oh, here's another bowl. but there's so few tasks generally in the kind of work that I do, and most of my clients do, and so many of my friends, that are so clear cut. And so I think that fuzziness of the world we live in, and the challenges of determining what's the task, which one should I start with, when is it even done, when is it good enough, I think that's really paralyzing in so many ways. And it's easier between having that anxiety of choosing the task to work on, because there's so many consequences also. Like the consequences are very heavy if I don't choose the right task to work on this morning as an entrepreneur, for example. Maybe my business is not going to take off. So it feels like a heavy weight. So maybe I should read one more article or watch one more
Oh,
video on
yeah.
YouTube about a related topic. Or maybe I should go on social media a little bit to know what other people in my niche are talking about today, right? It's satisfying to do that. And it feels like we're doing something, and it's busy work. But it doesn't take us very far in our own growth and the development of our projects. So been there, done that, got the t-shirt, the baseball cap, and all the things that go with it. And it still happens to me once in a while to fall into a rabbit hole that's really interesting, and I have a really good reason to be there. Also often around learning. I think we get obsessed
Oh,
with
yeah.
learning new skills.
I call it creative procrastination.
Totally, right? But just because we're listening to somebody else talking about something doesn't mean that we really learn how to actually do it. So learning by doing is so much more effective, and just tackling the task is the right thing to do. But also everything in our environment is conspiring
Oh, yeah.
to
Oh, yeah.
get
That's
us
another
to
factor.
do random stuff and to consume content and whatnot, as opposed to creating it, right? And people sometimes tell me, oh, I'm so lazy. I'm like, no, you're not lazy. You're battling the biggest forces in history. You know, it's not you. And if you can, fight back and reclaim your agency in the face of the algorithm. I mean, I don't mean to be dramatic, but that's really what it's about. You're a superhero, and you can do this, but it takes a little bit of mindfulness and effort and consistency, right?
No, you got it. You got it. I think you're totally right. We were not made. I mean, the evolution, I think, went way faster than our brain developed, and you got it, in terms of identifying those reasons. We don't realize it. It's so much easier to go outside, kind of do this garden work. Like imagine the garden work is also very satisfying, to clean the dishes, or whatever physical work that we used to do
Mm-hmm.
for centuries, if not millennia. I mean, I don't know. And right now, our brain is just capitulating, basically
Yeah,
saying,
yeah, yeah.
right.
And
So
I mean, I'm not saying so. I come from a farming background. Okay, so generations of farmers
better.
that worked really hard physically, and sometimes your crop fails. And nowadays there's a little bit of help when your crop fails, but historically that was not the case.
Mm,
And it's terribly hard work, and I'm not saying I'd like to go back to that, right? I'm not saying it's easier. It's just really hard in a different way. But maybe it was hard in a way that we were more prepared for,
yeah.
and that we had seen others deal with. And something else also that um, is challenging is that a lot of those tasks that we need to do, those decisions that we need to do about, what task should I work on in my business, or what's the next thing I should be writing, experts that do this, that are good at it, they make those decisions in their heads in an implicit manner that doesn't really get explained in a textbook.
Mm,
It's those are things that are really hard to learn, and that tacit knowledge that is out there, it's actually not out there, it's in people's head, right? And so people that are
mm,
new entrepreneurs, or that are fledgling writers, grad students or beginning writers, content creators, There's a lot of education you can access online, but I think it's still hard to really understand how good decisions are made. And really, it's again by practice, trial and error. You do the thing and then you see the results and it works or it doesn't work. It takes you somewhere or not. And you have to be mindful of the results and try again another day, right?
Right.
But those are all skills that are very much implicit. And we're not good at making them explicit and teaching them to other people. So beginners in those fields will find it extra challenging.
Right. This is what I call decision fatigue, like
Also, yeah.
or analysis paralysis. So, one or another, basically you're either blocked by the decision. You don't know how to make the decision, so you just procrastinate not to make that decision, or you just
Yeah.
make one decision, but then you need to make another and then another, and then scientists tell us that we only have that many, the capacity of that many decisions we can do in a given time, and just out of the decision fuel, and we just procrastinate because we're just not able to make the next decision. So I think it's a combination. And you're right. I think the overwhelm that you mentioned is also because there is probably way more information that we ever had access to, and that we ever can process, and that we ever can make sense. And I think it works mainly against us, not for us. Because when we don't have information, that we are probably more prompted to act and kind of learn by, like you said, learn by doing, and just learning from the action, from the feedback from the action. Whereas right now, because there is so much information, we think we can learn from the information rather from doing, and we think we somehow can make the shortcut. So instead of going option A, option B, option C, and finally get to option Z, which is the right option, we think we can jump from option A somehow to option Z from learning, which is we can't. We just have to experiment and fail our way into option Z. Now, how can we help people? Like, what can convince people that they cannot learn their way into the answer? They can only do they can only do their way into the answer. You have any suggestion?
Oh, it is so hard. So I'm sorry, I'm going to talk about cooking again, but it's so
Cool.
similar.
Yes.
When I teach cooking, and so many people I work with discover me. I mean, that's wonderful because they see me cooking on YouTube. And what are they doing? They're watching people cook on YouTube, and they can watch hundreds of hours because YouTube is an endless tunnel of really interesting. And I don't, the work that content creators are doing, and I'm one of them, is great. It is fabulous, and there's a lot of people sharing great stuff. But so people sit there and they watch those videos and they think they just need to maybe watch one more to get it. And then it comes time to make soup, and it starts with chopping an onion, and they have to hold a knife and the onion is kind of slippery, and they're, how did they do it again? You need to chop onions to really, it's okay to have watched one or two videos, but watching hundreds of hours of onion chopping will not really make you better. You need the feedback of doing the task with your body. And so in the same way, we need to do the writing in particular, and we need to put it out there. And I can try to convince people all day long, but I think the key way is to try it themselves and getting that first nudge, and just do it. And a way that I find effective in that sense, to achieve that outcome, is to make it as small as possible. And many people, myself included, resist that, right? What do you mean writing for 10 minutes? You know, like I cannot
Yeah.
possibly write anything good in 10 minutes. That's fine. Write something bad in 10 minutes, you know, and maybe tomorrow you can write in 15 minutes. But having that tiny little thing that you do every single day is really, and if you want to spend the rest of your day watching YouTube and reading books about how to write, you know, that's fine. Okay, but tomorrow we'll do it a little more. And
Yeah.
you start getting satisfaction and to see results and to feel yourself getting into the groove. And it's really, there's no replacement for that. It's just doing by doing. So you know, you can take a horse to the water, but you can't force them to drink. Well, I'm sorry for the cliche, but it's so true.
All
People
right.
need to find it in them to do that first step. But if the step is tiny, it definitely helps.
All right. All right. Well, before we get into more kind of a nitty-gritty, you mentioned cooking, and I want to bring it in the story in the mix because we mentioned that and we promised to talk about that. So you talk, you have a YouTube channel and you talk about cooking vegan.
Yes.
Tell us more.
Oh,
How did that start and how it all come together?
yes.
Uh, I'm curious.
Yes. As I was mentioning, come from an academic background. I was an
Mm-hmm.
academic researcher. More specifically, I'm a sociologist of science by training and sociologist of education. I was studying the training of scientists. But what it meant for me was essentially doing hundreds of interview and tagging along with people as an ethnographer, looking at what they were doing, and then going back to my office and typing field notes and transcribing, you know, we were transcribing by hand interviews, I mean, with a computer, but we were transcribing interviews and analyzing them and doing all
No
of that
AI?
sort
You
of
didn't
work.
have AI?
No AI. Well, there were some AI, and I was just reflecting about that this week. If I was again going to be transcribing interviews right now, I think I would still force myself to transcribe some of them myself because you get so intimate with how someone talks when you you know, when you type out their stuff. Anyway, so that was my work for many years. And when I finished my PhD, I worked in research management. So really having my fingers in a lot of different pies in terms of supporting other researchers with their work in the field of clean energy for a while, and then in the field of education. And I have to admit, I became quite frustrated, especially when I was working with clean energy, but also in education to some extent, because the problems that the planet is facing, all of us, the whole population, humans on Earth, are so big, so gigantic. And the work we were doing had not a chance to make a significant difference
Mm.
that I could see in my lifetime. And even if we were working on some really innovative and cool stuff, as I guess a sociologist, maybe my bias was to look at this and think we really need to change how humans think and how society is organized, right? And all of this technology is lovely, but it's not going to be enough. And I felt a lot of frustration related to that. I also needed at the same time to make changes because I had a second child and my husband was starting a job and things were all over the map. And I was like, okay, I'm going to give this a shot and try to do something again on my own. I had worked in my own business in my early 20s. And so I decided to leave academia again and to try to create a tiny business of some sort where the sort of work I would be doing would give me the feeling that it is, I can see, I can sense the difference. It will be
Mm.
probably on a very small scale, but you know what? At least it will give me satisfaction.
Yeah.
I need that immediate kind of feedback, maybe that we were
Mm.
talking about.
Yeah.
And so I started this little business. I figured that food was the main way that we could get people to have a positive impact on the environment, on the world, live in line with their values. But also increasingly, I'm seeing the health components of this. And so I decided to, at the beginning, I started a meal planning service, which is still running, because my mom always said the hardest thing about dinner is not cooking, it's not cleaning up, it's deciding what's for dinner.
No.
And I very much felt that. And that was something that was really compatible with having two super young children, because I didn't need to
Mm.
be interacting, I could work in the middle of the night if I needed to. And so I did that for some time. And now as my children are becoming more independent, increasingly, I'm having more live events and doing some one-on-one cooking clinics with some clients, which I
Mm.
really enjoy, where I teach them to be more hands-on. So I force people to not just watch, but do it at the same time as me. And
Mm.
I feel, it's also not enough to change the world completely, but it's changing some individual people's worlds, some hundreds of people out there, maybe some thousands, that are feeling the ripple effect of better meals that they're cooking for themselves. So that brings me satisfaction. But at the same time, it's really hard working as an individual, a solopreneur. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
team of one. There's
Yeah.
nobody, no one cares if I don't show up one morning at my desk to work. And that definitely is a challenge every day that I continue to
No,
deal with.
thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And, when I left my corporate job, I was in the finance, in the big accounting firm, and then I moved to become a CFO of a huge project. And it was the same. I didn't feel that I'm making any impact with
Yeah.
what I do daily, and I felt frustrated about it, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I know it's much smaller scale, but it's
Hmm.
very, very visible. When it's happening, it's very
Yeah.
visible.
It's
Very
very
visible.
rewarding, right? It's feeling that another human will have a better experience today because of
Very.
a little thing you did. That was hard to see when writing grant proposals for
Mm, yeah. Yeah.
better fuel cells.
No,
you know.
I can totally understand that, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And it has its own challenges, like you mentioned, and we'll come back to them because I think these are important. And I keep talking about them because I think we don't talk about them enough, of the challenges of solopreneurs who are coaches are solopreneurs mainly, even if they
Oh,
have
yes.
like a VA or subcontractors, they still solely responsible for their
Yeah.
business, and main doer, and the boss, the doer, they fulfill majority of the roles. But we'll come back to that. Um Oh, I lost the train of thought. But yes, there are a lot of yeah, let's get to the challenges, because I think they're not talked enough of the challenges. And you mentioned one, and I think it falls into the area of your expertise, where when I was, and I say this often, when I was in the corporate world for 15 years, I was the most productive person in there. Like everyone was amazed how I was able to have a family of 3 kids, doing my executive MBA, flying to London every 2 weeks for 2 days, and fulfilling the director in PwC, the big four accountant firm,
Yeah.
and just being married, kids, work, study. I did it all. Everybody was thinking I'm a superhuman. I thought that was super easy. And I was not wrong, because when I moved to be a solopreneur, I'm like, oh my God, how the hell am I going to do it? Because it just fell apart. I just, from the most productive person, like a superhuman on earth, I became someone who is like not able to put myself, to do anything, because there were so many distractions. There were so many other things we just discussed earlier in the podcast. So let's talk about that. The coaches realize that this is a challenge. Like, I don't know if you have a lot of clients who are coaches, or we can make a general solopreneur. Like, is this a challenge you see a lot? And
Yes.
how, I don't know. Let's just start there.
Absolutely. So I have to give a nod here to Nick Milo, who is a luminary, such a great role model in the field of note-taking, note-making, using note-taking systems. And Nick always says, structure is earned, right?
Mm.
And that's a derivative from Gall's law, which says that all complex systems have evolved from simple systems that worked and that needed to have extra layers added to them constantly, right? Because the situation became more and more complex. And when I was listening to you, it made me think about that because you were describing, you know, your big job in the big accounting firm. So the accounting firm used to be a very tiny thing. And over, you know, the last 100 years, it grew to be very big and to have this, you know, complex system. And you were, you know, one piece of the system with probably somewhat defined responsibilities. And then you're a
Oh yeah.
grad student in a MBA program that's like very clear what you have to do here. And
Yes.
I mean, families have evolved and it's a little more complex than before, but you know, a mother is often a mother. And so there's clear responsibilities there as
Yeah.
well, whether you like it or not. They're in your face when you have young children, you know, what you got to do
And
next
it's
is very
very
clear.
defined. And it's very defined what you need to do, pretty much.
You need to make a snack. Whatever it is, there's a snack involved, right? And so going from that, where all of that complexity is there on the one hand, and you need to hold so many things in your head, and modern life is so complicated, but at the same time, it's rather well defined and structured, and you're in a structure that's been created over hundreds of years. And the kind of work that we're talking about as solopreneurs, as coaches, as creatives, content creators, those are all, I mean, there's been a smattering of that throughout centuries. If you think of some, you know, Patreons, patrons existed before Patreon, right?
Mhm.
But I'm sure Leonardo da Vinci got up sometimes in the morning and thought, what am I going to do today? But he was one in millions. And now
Yeah.
there's many more of us
Mm.
going about our day trying to find a structure, trying to find what it is that we're supposed to be doing exactly. And yeah,
And
it
some
is
have as
really
many
hard.
ideas as Leonardo in so many different areas, like you, like cooking, productivity, writing a book, and maybe this and maybe that. And where do
Yeah,
I even start? Where do I even start?
totally. And I had this client a few months ago in on Coachdotme who was transitioning from having a job not unlike the job you used to have and starting her small business. And she told me something along the lines of, you know, I quit my job because I wanted to not have somebody telling me what to do anymore. And now I kind of wish
I
somebody
want,
would tell me what to do because there's so much and it's so overwhelming. And how am I going to kind of cut through this overwhelm to decide on one thing and do that thing until like it's good enough? But how am I going to know it's good enough? You know, going back to that whole thing we talked about earlier. And in large organizations, there's a whole structure of, you know, rewards and feedback and all this that's in place to tell you you're going on the right way or the wrong way. And sometimes it's a little fuzzy, but overall, you know, there's a lot more clarity than when you're tackling this on your own. And I want to tell everybody who's trying to be a small entrepreneur or a content creator or a coach, you know, it's hard. Give yourself grace. It's not because you're less than or because you're lazy or whatever. It is just hard. And that's unfortunately something that's not always emphasized by let's say the business you know, the solopreneur kind of education leaders out
yes,
there, the solopreneur
yes.
influencers, let's put it that way, that have programs to sell to teach people how to become entrepreneurs and start your own business and this and that. I think there's a lot of selling the dream that's
Yeah.
going on. But the daily reality is it's tough.
They
That's for sure.
also,
I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful I get to do this. It's a great privilege, right? But it's not like the bright light of direction falls from the sky every day. It's not happening.
No,
It's often
no,
cloudy.
no, absolutely. I think it's not talked at all. I think it's omitted. There are a lot of dreams sold, and there are a lot of knowledge, like learn this marketing technique, learn how to build a business, learn the marketing side, learn the business side, learn the coaching craft. So these elements are sold and advertised. Now, what is not is the like, think about the iceberg, right? So
Yeah.
they sell the top of the iceberg, which is
Yeah.
nice and shiny and you can see, but then there is a huge part of the iceberg underneath the water, and that basically what we talked today about. And again, that's not to discourage people, because I had I go as a guest on the podcast through the Podmatch. Actually, highly recommend. That's a great service if you, as a coach, want to advertise yourself and be a guest.
Right.
This is
Right.
a great service. So I'm there. I love experimenting for myself, so that I can then recommend it to my clients. Now, and then some of the hosts do the pre-interview. So yesterday I had a pre-interview with the host, and we talked about, she's like, and I was talking about like this, what we just discussed. And she's like, do you have any encouraging messages? Like this, like
Anything
she
positive to
was,
say?
or maybe, my audience is going to be so scared that I don't want to say, guys, who's listening, who wants to become coaches or are coaches. I don't want, we don't want to say it to discourage you, but I think the awareness is very important. So there is the whole iceberg underneath that is not talked, that is not taught, and that is there. And that's why it's important to have coaches like Brigitte, because I say, and I say as many times as I can, and I'm going to repeat it, that if a coach never hired another coach with money, not as a practice client, not as a fun exercise or whatever, just as a coach, because the coach faced a problem and they need to hire a real coach like Brigitte, like me, like, whoever. If you'd never done it, you cannot possibly expect that someone's going to hire you with money, because you don't understand what it means to be a client, how valuable it is to actually hire a coach, like paying money, what it means in terms of the relationship. Because I think you need to walk the talk. I don't know, you have an opinion of that? I just keep talking about this because I think we need to talk more, because coaches need just to get that on their minds.
Yeah, and you know what I was talking about earlier about the tacit knowledge, all the things that are implicit and inside our heads.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
when we work with a coach, what we do is partly it's kind of another form of journaling to some extent, but it's putting it out there for another human, a journal who responds, perhaps, but it forces us to make those dilemmas, those thoughts, those challenges, all of that stuff. And you were mentioning the iceberg, and I was thinking the bottom of, under the iceberg, it's very dark, right? And
Oh, yeah.
bringing that to the surface, bringing that to the light in the process of working with somebody, and having a coach who is good at reframing, who is good at making us feel seen, I think is such an important part, because again, those are all clouds in our heads. And when we can just put them out there and have someone see them, someone who maybe has been there, who has seen so many other people struggle with the exact same thing, perhaps in a different shade, but really those are all largely the same issues that most of us deal with. And even those of us that have really weird problems, we're never alone
Oh,
with
no.
that problem. There's something when I was working as a researcher, as a sociologist, something we would talk about often was the concept of saturation, which is when you do interviews, and we did like these really in-depth life interviews with people. You interview a person and you're like, whoa, what a special life story. And then you interview a second person, like, whoa, that was different. And then a third person, and you get a third very different life story. And then the fourth person you interview, it's like, wait a minute, there's like, it's kind of similar to a mix of the first two, right? And when you get to about 10 or 12 different people that you've talked to and really like quite a bit in depth, that you know really well, there's not a whole lot of new stuff that surfaces. Deep down, we're all the same. And when we expose ourselves, when we unwrap our inner thoughts for a coach, when we share those things, and well, they've seen the other 12, and they know that we're not alone. And I think having that reflected back to us really enhances our humanity. And I would love to say that in our intimate relationships with our spouses, our partners, our children, perhaps our friends, we get that, but we don't always. And perhaps we don't most of the time. I don't think we quite make that allowance for deep, vulnerable conversations about more like worky stuff, that kind of more intellectual work with very many people among us. And for example, with coworkers, then sometimes we may feel like we're in a competition with them, or we feel less than them. And there's all these different issues. And in the household, there's also power dynamics and just, people have more skin in the game. Whereas having an outsider like a coach, it's like, if anybody has read The Fall by Albert Camus, the main character sits at a bar and just, tells his life to the guy who's sitting next to him. And, talking to a stranger. Isn't there an Ed Sheeran song about that? Talking to a stranger in the night and telling all your stuff. Well, a coach can be that stranger. But I'm not talking in the therapy context, but more in that unwrapping of all those actions that we want to do to become our better self and to grow into different roles, and that we don't know how to start around, that maybe we feel completely lonely and isolated. And definitely when we work with a coach, we discover that, we're not alone. And then we're able to generously share that, pay it forward and share that with people that work with us as the coach and them as the coachee. I think it's you're right to say it's a really important experience to go through that and to be able to pass it on.
No, absolutely. Quick story. I wrote a book back to 2019 about the female midlife crisis. That was my previous life. I was very much into that, kind of go through my own, the book is much about my own crisis, but I did some research about the midlife crisis in general and females. And to write the book, I did 50 interviews of the women.
Nice.
Who are going or who already passed the midlife crisis. And the finding was like, oh my God, yes, those stories are different, but there are more similarities than anyone would expect. And I think the most common feedback once I published my book, the reviews, the feedback that I received, the most common feedback was, oh my God, it was me, but actually like, that is everybody. Oh, not everybody, but it's like very common to feel that way, to think that way. That was the most common feedback for me from my book. And I'm like, if
feeling
anything,
seen.
anything I achieved, that it was normalized, that feeling that way, thinking that way, experiencing that way was okay. I'm like, okay, I've achieved, I've achieved my goal.
Totally. I love it. That's fantastic.
All right. So final question. I know we got to wrap up. Like, But I gotta ask that one because I'm like you probably. I have so, well, maybe not like you. I have so many interests. I
Oh,
like to do
yes.
this. I've been a productivity coach for a while. Like I've been into the midlife crisis. I even wrote a book. Like I was into personal values. Now I for the last few years, I'm a business coach, helping coaches on the business and marketing side, and I love it. But I'm still, sometimes having this interest here and there. How, kind of productivity coaching that you do, helping creators, you say, right? Students, solopreneurs with kind of focus, procrastination stuff, and then having the YouTube channel on vegan cooking and stuff. Like how these two, how do they live together? Is it okay? Is it your personal brand? Is not conflicted? I mean,
Right.
because we have to be one. Like how does it work? Is it working? And if yes, how do you manage to marry these two together?
I think it really helps me with my own accountability to practice also as a coach. So it's definitely not the core of my practice. It's probably like if I think of my work time, which is a bit of an elusive thing, I'm not a person who thinks I need to have a separate personal and work life very separately. To me, I actually enjoy having those things integrated. But if I think of my work-ish hours, coaching is probably maybe 20% of that. And it helps me keep those habits, those important habits on top of my own mind. It keeps me accountable. It makes me more likely to practice what I preach because it's like spaced repetition. I'm constantly reminding myself of the importance of those different habits by teaching them to others and nudging others to go down that route. One of my favorite techniques for people who are writers or any form of creators, but a lot of people I work with are writing dissertations or theses or research articles. And I like to remind them the famous, some call it Hemingway's bridge or parking on a downhill, which is never finish work when it's finished. If you're writing something, if you're going to be writing tomorrow, park on a downhill. For those who have driven a standard car, it's easier to start your car if you're going downhill than going uphill. Many people don't know that anymore because they don't drive standard cars. But making it easy for you to start the next day when you know exactly what's coming next. So stop. It's tempting to go all the way to the end of your thought, but force yourself to just write. Tomorrow, I will write about this next idea that I know exactly what it is. And then you let it go for the night, right? And that's something that I remind others to do. It's great to work. You're doing awesome today, and make sure to stop before you run out of gas, right? And in the same way, it reminds me to do those things. So that's for me is really important as a constant refresher of those good habits. As I was mentioning, I'm in constant recovery. So it's reinforcing the good stuff for me and remembering that just a tiny bit of progress every day, just chipping at the habits, keeping the project simmering in the long run, all of those things, it's as good for me as it's for everybody else. So, and those are, I think, when we feel a little bit like a superhero. Oh yeah, I'm so good at this. I'll be fine. No, no, that's where that's where you start to struggle again, right? Something I've done with habits is sometimes I would build myself a really good system, and then I'll give an example, FocusMate. So I work a lot on FocusMate.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to try FocusMate, hit me up. I will give you my link. I will take you through your first session. It has changed my life. I'm so enthusiastic about it. Okay, so having said that, at the
Yeah.
beginning when I was using FocusMate, I was like, oh, this is great. I'm doing, FocusMate has really helped me get better at this, get back into writing. Okay, I'm good now. I don't have to use FocusMate anymore. I will just move on to not use it and I'm fine because I've restarted, right? And then I'll be okay for a few days. And then after a week, my productivity or writing pace would decline. And then after a month, I was like, oh, what is wrong with me? And then I would realize, oh, I could go on FocusMate. But instead now I just go on FocusMate all the time. Like
Mm.
I don't, it's not bad. It's not like having those little habits. It's not like it's a crutch. It's just part of my workflow. And acknowledging that those habits, having a daily check-in with myself, having a weekly check-in with myself, keeping those habits going even when I don't need them
Mm.
is the key to being consistent over the long run. So I need that. I need that daily reminder, and I get it from my clients. So I'm so grateful for them being there, because otherwise maybe I would be floundering more than I am on a daily basis. So
Oh, yeah. No, thank you. I think, no, I agree with you. When you work with the clients, I think one of the benefits, we talked about the dark side of the coaching of the iceberg,
yeah.
but the good side of the coaching iceberg is that you need to grow. You need to stay you need to stay, your game need to be at a certain level, because
Yes.
whenever I'm coaching my clients, if I'm I'm slipping, I just don't feel like I'm you
Yeah,
know i
totally.
can I can be helpful to my clients. So I always stay with my habits, and I grow. I always learn. I always study something new, because these days, every day we
Yeah.
learn something new, how our brain works, how habits work, everything. So this is the
Yeah.
good side, that it helps us. So totally,
Yeah, being a
totally.
role model, for others. And I'm not a perfect role model, which is good for people to know too, you know. And it's I don't know
Which
if
is
anybody listening,
okay. Which is
yeah, is
okay. If
familiar
you
with
get
oh,
if you get
yeah,
a
go ahead.
perfect role model, uh, uh that's
It's
that's wrong.
suspicious.
No, that's
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah, I don't know if you know anything about cycle racing, but there's something called drafting when you're exactly behind someone else on a bike. You get
Mm.
maybe a 10 to 15% reduced effort that you need to put in.
Yeah.
You're kind of in their
Yeah,
wind
yeah, yeah.
shadow, right?
Yes, yes.
But I learned a few years ago, I don't do that sort of stuff anymore, but I learned that the person in the front also gets a little bit of the physics
Oh, really?
benefits. Yeah, there's a little bit of a kind of wind thing that happens that also gives them, a tiny boost, but it does help them. And certainly coaching is not the
Okay.
same as this, but I feel there's that same idea that by being a role model for others, by showing up consistently, by encouraging them to do so, it gives so much to me as well. And I really enjoy the relationships. There's nothing I like more than when a client, especially grad students who are writing a thesis or a dissertation, and they finish. And, a year
Yeah.
ago or 7 months ago when they got
Yeah.
on, it did not look really good. They were really struggling and things were all over the map, but they chipped at it, and every day you cheer them on, and boom, they're done. And I'm on top of the earth. I feel so good. I have
Yes.
such a good day. I feel so productive because I'm basking in the shadow of their achievement, and it makes me feel so good. So
No,
let's keep doing
absolutely.
it.
Absolutely. Again, on the bright side of the coaching,
Yeah.
our clients' successes, I don't know, I feel happier than for my
Yeah.
own success, because it's like, it's a magic, because when you do something, you're like, okay, I put effort, I got result. Now there,
Yeah.
it's there, like, you so proud, but it's them, but you
Yeah.
you have your own kind of small share, and I don't
Yeah.
know, you just feel so proud for them, and your contribution
Totally.
feels so good. And that's that um cleaning the dishes thing, where
Yeah. It's
where
done.
you can coming back, just come the full circle, come the full circle. That is satisfying in coaching, versus working in a big corporation, where it's very hard to see result of your individual effort. Coaching can be very, very satisfying
Very
in such
rewarding. Yes.
situation. And I
Love it.
think that's a great point to finalize this. So, thank you so much, Bridget. Obviously, if you need help with productivity, procrastination, writing habits, just in general, doing something on a consistent basis, basically find Brigitte on Coachdotme. The links will be below. Or if you're a vegan fan and you love to learn, or you love to learn how to cook vegan, there will be a link to YouTube channel. You just hit 1,000. I've read that.
Yeah, I did.
Congratulations. Well done. Well done. Congratulations. So the link will be there. Go and find. You will enjoy it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Lydia. It's always a delight to chat with you. And thank you for keeping Coach.me going. It was a lifesaver for me many years ago, and it continues to improve lives one little checkbox at a time. Thank you.
Well said. Well said. All right, guys. Well, I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.